This is 5 Live. Joe Dante is here. His new movie is Hole in 3D. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Is in 3D part of the title?
It became part of the title. It used to be just the Hole, but I see now it's the Hole 3D, which is fine. You know, there's Piranha 3D, which also isn't really part of the title. That's all really an advertising slogan.
And on the
film, it just says Piranha.
While you were legging it here as fast as you managed, we've already mentioned that Piranha 2D. That was you. That was your film.
Yeah, it was me.
Okay, so. The Hole. Let's start with that. Mark hasn't seen it. I have seen it. Just set the scene for us. It's nice to have you back directing movies. Just explain about The Hole.
Well, The Hole is a movie about a family, dysfunctional family of a mom and two kids, one older, one younger, and two boys. And they move from a big city to a small podunk town, which is no fun. The kids are kind of bored and sullen about the reasons for moving. We don't quite know what they are, but they seem to be a little dark. And although they meet the girl next door, who's sort of a bright spot, they're kind of aimless, and they're downstairs in their basement, their new basement, and they discover a hole in the floor, which has numerous locks on it. And this being a horror film, and them being kids, they make it their business to open up the hole. And of course, again, this being a horror movie, when you open up the hole, stuff comes out. Bad stuff.
So what can you tell us about? I mean, clearly this is the mystery that unfolds through the film. What can you tell us any more about what might be there?
I can only tell you that when I read the script, and I read a lot of these type of films, what struck me was that the solution to the mystery, what is in the hole, was completely unexpected by me. It went in a direction that I really didn't expect it to go, and a direction that turned out to be a little more dramatic and poignant than we would expect from a movie like this. So it seemed to me that that coupled with the fact that it's a slightly retro version of the kind of movies that I was making in the 80s, I thought, well, maybe I am the right guy to do this.
Yes, and those films you're referring to, Gremlins, Gremlins 2, Inner Space, and so on. So we're back in that area of, I mean, you called it a horror film. It has a 12A certificate. So it's. Could you describe it as a family horror film? I mean,
well, the idea was supposedly there's a dark undercurrent in the movie, and there's a very dark subplot in the picture, which we agonized about how explicit to be, because like all movies that are good family movies, there's a level on which the adults can watch it, and there's another level on which the kids watch it. And if you're subtle enough, and you can get a lot of things through to the adults that don't necessarily get picked up by the kids. So it's a level kind of a thing. You want to make a picture that adults can enjoy and a movie that kids can enjoy, because if the adults think it's just for kids, they'll just drop them off and not go, and you don't make any money. So you have to try to appeal to teenagers, older teenagers, and adults all at the same time. And it's tricky because the ages of the kids it's one of the reasons why movies top off at a certain point. Later they look back and they say, well, the problem with this movie was the kids were too young. We should have made them older. But then the problem is if you made the kids older, the actions in the script are written for younger kids, and therefore it doesn't make sense because the kids aren't acting correctly. So it's always a trick. You're combining what your artistic aspirations are with what your box office needs.
It should be said, in terms of 12A certificate horror, one of the scariest movies ever made, George Slois's original version of The Vanishing, is a 12A certificate, and that film scared the life out of me.
Because?
Well, because it's incredibly scary. But it's a 12A certificate. There's nothing explicit in it. I mean, it's
it's scary because it's intense, and that's always the issue in America about ratings, when you're trying to get a rating for a film and not have an R but get a PG-13. How intense is the movie? It's often not what you show necessarily or anything explicit, but if the intensity of it. And of course, as a filmmaker, the intensity is what you want. You want to make the film intense. So there's always this question of, what do you have to trim, or what is there a suggestion that you have to not make in order for the picture to be supposedly approved by a group of psychiatrists or whoever these people are who make these ratings.
I mean, I think I'm interested that you said teenagers, older teenagers, and adults, because if it's a 12A, anyone can go as long as they're accompanied by an adult. And we often get emails and texts about this. I would say, if I was 10 and I went to see this film, it would scare the living daylights out of me. I mean, it is really, I think it's too much for, I would say, an average 10-year-old. I don't know.
Well, I had that problem with Gremlins. I mean, there was a lot of issues when Gremlins came out. There was a scene where the mother puts a gremlin on the microwave and it splats. And
That's just funny.
There was, well, that's what I thought. But then a lot of parents were saying, well, you know what's going to happen? My kid is going to see it, and he's going to put his little sister in the microwave, and he's going to microwave her. And that's of
bad
course
parenting.
Well, it is, but that's obviously obviously never happened. It reminds me of the story when some mother went up to Alfred Hitchcock and said, "My daughter won't take a shower since she saw Psycho," and he said, "Send her to the dry cleaners," because these things are people don't give children enough credit. I mean, kids are smarter than people think they are. They always have been, and now they're not only smarter, but they're more worldly, certainly than I was when I was a kid. The kind of movies that kids watch, particularly horror movies, you know, you can give it any certificate you want, but when it finally comes out in video, they're going to go to the kid next door's house and they're going to watch it.
It is worth pointing out that Gremlins is still a 15 certificate in the UK for exactly those sequences.
Although I think it's actually, I mean, maybe it's because I saw it when I didn't have kids and I watched The Hole having kids, but I think The Hole is scarier than Gremlins. Because
from your lips to the box office's ear.
Because as soon as Gremlins, as soon as the gremlin turns out, I go, okay, fine, it's a monster film. It's fine. It's not going to happen, not for one moment. But there is something about the hole in your basement. You're going to think, I reckon what if there is a hole in there? What if it goes on forever?
Well, it's a worst fears movie. I mean, yes. The way that the picture works is that you actually, unlike some horror movies, you actually give some time off to character development so that you can relate to who these kids are, so that when the movie turns out to be about their worst fears, they're fears that the audience can identify with.
And 3D because?
3D because when I was given the script, I thought this is a lovely movie, but it's a little small. It doesn't have a lot of characters. It doesn't have a lot of locations. And a lot of it takes place in the basement of the house where the kids live. And I thought, this could look too small. If we do it in 3D, we not only can make it a bigger movie and seem to expand it, but also because so much of it is psychological, we can actually use it to instead of throwing things at the audience, to actually bring the audience into the picture, to make. And some people who've seen the movie tell me they feel like they're in the basement with the kids because the movie sort of wraps around them. And it's a matter of how you use the 3D. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but the best way is when you immerse the audience into something and they sort of forget that it's in 3D.
But when you look back at something like Matinee, in which it's talking about William Castle and all the jiggery-pokery that he did, with skeletons flying out and smell-o-vision and buzzers in the seats and the rest of it, and it always seemed to me that your attitude to that stuff was that you were entertained and enchanted by it, but you also you saw it for what it was, which was carnival showmanship. The fact is, we're all being told that the cinema is going 3D. That is the future, and I am terribly worried about that. I don't want cinema to all look like that.
Well, I because of that it won't. Even if 3D goes on, which there's some question as to whether it will, because of all the crappy fake 3D movies now that are giving it a bad name.
And when you say fake 3D, you mean the ones that aren't shot?
Movies that weren't shot in 3D and weren't never intended to even be seen in 3D and are not cut correctly for 3D and are not composed correctly for 3D, but are nonetheless sent off to India and come back in some sort of faux 3D.
We established that the word that is required is dimensionalized.
No, the word is retrofitted.
Okay, anyway.
Well, the point is that these pictures are not making audiences happy, and they may turn off on the entire idea of 3D. But I think that when 3D is used correctly in an appropriate film, not every film, no Dinner with Andre in 3D, that it can be a useful storytelling tool, much like CinemaScope became, color, all these other advancements. And I agree with you. I don't think there is the whole advent of 3D TV is something they talk. Well, everybody's TV is going to be in 3D. I don't want to watch the news in 3D. It's not going to happen. Because people aren't going to want to watch 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of 3D. It's too much. It's too hard. So I think when it's appropriate, I think 3D is a useful tool. I don't think it means that every movie that's produced needs to get sent to India and come back in this phony 3D process.
Do you think it's possible, Joe, that 3D, from all the problems that it's got, that someone will go, you know what, I can do something with this and it will be different?
Well,
and maybe you are it.
I presume that a lot of people have seen Avatar. Avatar is the current state of the art of 3D. Now, this is an unusual situation in that very few people have years to gestate about how they're going to do their movie. And here's a guy who had a movie he wanted to make, and he had to wait until the technology caught up with him. Stanley Kubrick used to do that also. Avatar is, aside from being a collection of more cliches than I've ever seen together in one movie, is quite an amazing concoction. It's created a world that couldn't be possible in any other medium, and which some people like so much that they want to live in it. The people go back to the movie because they actually find it more attractive than their real lives. Now, I bet Peter Pan did that for me when I was a kid, but that was different. I think that it is the harbinger of something new, but I don't think that your average cheeseball ripoff that's goes to India and comes back in dark and flickery is the future of 3D. And I think that eventually they'll either start labeling these pictures as real 3D versus fake 3D, or else people will just get the message. They will go, we're not gonna go unless we know that this is something worthwhile. And as the idea of auteurs doing 3D, Hitchcock was one of the last 3D movies in the old iteration in the 50s, Dial M for Murder, which very few people saw in 3D.
But it barely got released in 3D.
It hardly played anywhere because it was too late. But the fact is that when you see the movie today, it is a remarkable use of 3D, and it was certainly what I based my use in The Hole on, because it uses the space emotionally, which is something that can be done. It just isn't often.
Dan, on this email, I just felt I had to email to say Mr. Dante is truly one of the biggest reasons why I am as obsessed with cinema as I know I am. Brackets, BA Honours Film Studies. I saw Inner Space as an 8-year-old and instantly fell in love. I can honestly say I look back at that film the way others look back at Star Wars. Great to have Joe back making films. Is there any chance he can get Dennis Quaid involved and bring Tuck Pendleton back to the big screen?
Well, it's lovely to hear, and many people now are big fans of Inner Space. But when it came out, unfortunately, there were very few fans of Inner Space, partly because it had one of the worst titles ever and one of the worst ad campaigns. But people found it later on home video, a phenomenon which I think is also going to be difficult to reproduce, because the idea of discovering movies again in their second life. Movies don't have a second life anymore because of the lack of the DVD market is going away. The shops are shuttering, and every movie has to be on demand, and it's going to have to be sent to your machine, and you're going to have to know about it. Somebody's going to have to tell you about the billions and billions of movies in the libraries that are going to be available. We have more movies available now than we've ever had in anybody's lifetime, and yet there's so little known about most movies that happened before 1990 that there needs to be a clearinghouse where people say, look, here's a whole bunch of really important movies that you have to go see, because otherwise you won't know about them. That's one of the reasons I started my website, Trailers from Hell, because it's to show people that there are places to go to find commentary about movies that they've maybe never heard of and should be directed toward.
And will that make your job in future easier or more difficult?
My job as directing?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that, as you say, if the DVD market is disappearing,
well,
it's already everything is going to be on demand, will that make your job as a director making pictures?
If you're lucky enough to get one, it won't get a job. It won't make much difference. But the fact is that there will be less jobs because there will be less pictures. There are already less pictures because one of the ways in which movies, even the ones that aren't successful at the box office, which is the larger percentage of them, are still made, is because there's a plan that at the end of their run they will go to DVD and they can recoup their costs worldwide. And this has been a pretty good formula for a long time, but the formula is now dying. And so as a result, there are less people who are inclined to invest in a marginal movie, and which is why you've seen the loss of the mid-range movie. The movies are now either super cheap or
super
very expensive.
But it's interesting because Cleopatra theoretically went into, which is widely cited as the biggest flop of all time, went into profit either in 1973 thanks to the $5 million TV sale, or in 1986 due to the video then sell through. Even with movies that lost money as spectacularly as that, it was considered that the backstop of the small screen would in the end pay for them. It was just how long it would take them to pay for them. But you're saying that actually that's going to go away.
I think that's their fear, and I think that's one of the reasons you see such volatility in the movies and the movies that are made and the way they're marketed. The people who make movies literally don't know where these pictures are going to be shown or what their futures are going to be, and so they're very conservative with what they make, and that's why you see so many remakes and reboots and sequels and titles that sell themselves and don't need to be explained, because it's just easier for them, and it costs so much money now to open a movie, to pay for the prints and pay for the ads, that a lot of people just opt to do let's just not make it.
Can I just say before I forget that one of the scariest moments in Hole, which is the reason why you're here, is the appearance of Quinn Lord. I will say no more, but people should check that out, because I was thinking, wow, that's disturbing, and now I understand why.
Well, if there are any Mario Bava fans in the audience, they will find, I think, a number of references to one of his greatest works, Kill Baby Kill.
I imagine Piranha 3D you were shown a special screening of.
No. In fact, I wasn't invited to the premiere, if there was a premiere.
But you have seen it?
No.
Well, there's no point in you staying there. You might as well go.
Sorry.
I kind of assumed, you being Piranha Man, that they'd have had...
No, they asked me to be in it. James Cameron and I were supposed to play sea captains or something who were going to give advice to the kids about safety. And neither Jim, for his own reasons, didn't do it, and I was just not available, and so we're not in it. So all I know is what I've seen in the trailers and what I've read, it was remarkably well received critically in America. It's surprising the reviews were. Everybody thought it was a jolly romp.
Yes,
but people unfortunately didn't particularly go.
But that should be the review. You know, Piranha 3D. Joe's not in it.